First of all, I'd like to welcome you all to this afternoon panel session. It's described as the Executive Director Colorado Broadband Panel. And I'd like to start with some introductions. I'm Anthony Neal-Graves. I'm the Executive Director of the Broadband Office, or formerly also known as the Broadband Czar, coming from my Lieutenant Governor. And I'd just like to quickly introduce everyone who's on the panel here. So starting immediately to my right is Sumana Nallapati, is the Secretary of Technology and CIO. We have Stephanie Copeland, the Executive Director of the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. And then next to her, we have Michael Lewis, who is the Deputy Executive Director of the Department of Transportation. And then finally, to my far right is Halter, who is the Executive Director of the Department of Local Affairs. And what we're going to do is each of us are going to talk for maybe 3 to 5 minutes and share with you some perspective on broadband. And then we're going to open up to questions, because I think the real fun about this session will be the Q&A that we can have with the group. Now, I'm new to the job. I've been in this job for all of 60 days, so I'm sure all of you have an expectation. I have all of this wonderful insight about broadband in Colorado. What I will tell you is that I joined this governor's office and took on this role because of the passion that I saw with the governor and many of his cabinet members around this issue. And in being here today, interacting with many of you, I also see all of the passion that's coming from the communities across the state trying to address this issue. I think all of you really do understand how important broadband is. And oddly, one of the things that I've observed is, and I know this might come as a little strange to some of you, I think Senate Bill 152 in some ways is actually a good thing. I know that it's frustrating in the sense that you have to go out and have these ballot resolutions to opt out of 152, but I think what it's driving is the passion within the communities that this is something that we really want. And I think it gives you a lot of leverage to go drive the agenda going forward. So I know it's a pain in the butt in some ways, but I actually think it's a very good thing. The only thing I would say about broadband from my perspective is it's just the next level of infrastructure investment that I think the United States needs to make. I'm a history buff, so I look back over the history of this country, and you think going all the way back to the early 1800s when we built the Erie Canal. Many of you probably don't know this, but there was federal money that was involved in creating that, and it drove commerce. Then if you think about the transcontinental railroads, the government had a role to play there as well, opened up commerce. If you think about rural electrification in this country, you think about universal service around phones, where I came from, because I spent most of my career working in telecommunications. Again, the federal government played a role. And I think in broadband, we're at that point as well. I'm not saying that the government needs to own and drive those networks, but I think we need to play a role in ensuring that all of the citizens have access. And the way I think about broadband is that it is fundamental to every aspect of our life, whether it's education, it's healthcare, it's economic development, it's public safety. All of those things are a role that broadband plays in. And I think collectively, we have to go and solve that problem. So I'm not going to pontificate a lot today about all the things that I've learned in the last 60 days traveling around the state and many of you, but I'm looking forward to working with all of you to really help us move the ball forward. And I'm going to turn it over to Sumana and let you share a few thoughts.
It's truly an honor and privilege to be part of this panel along with such amazing leaders from CDOT and and Stephanie, who cares so very deeply about this subject. Broadband is very, very important to me, and we were so excited when the governor instituted this Office of Broadband here in the Office of Information Technology and elevated this role, and bringing on Tony, who's got a lot of technical expertise and background. Again, you've mentioned a lot of the benefits of broadband, and for me, I come from a healthcare background, and I've seen the benefits directly myself when you have the connectivity with telepsychiatry, virtual health, all of those things that are critical in saving people's lives. Same thing with education. So the governor takes this aspect very, very seriously, and the collaboration between the agencies is more now compared to even the previous years. And Stephanie, with her background coming from the broadband telecom area, and Tony's expertise, and Irv and CDOT, all of the things that we are bringing together in the collaboration is truly something that I'm proud of. We're all working towards one goal from the governor's cabinet. As far as education superhighway, I think there was a big presentation this morning. You heard about the K-12 education and all the things that are happening in that area. Brian Shepard on my team is very involved with that effort, and we are seeing great progress in terms of the connectivity, the mapping that we are seeing, the reports that we are getting out of that effort. And I would say again, the mapping that's going on within the Office of Information Technology, we are working with the providers to make sure that we have the most accurate data available. And it's a challenge, right? It's based on what the providers give us, and we're working very closely with them to make sure that the mapping is accurate so we can go target those areas that truly need this place. And we're working closely with the Governor's Office legislative team to make sure that the legislation understands the importance of giving us the funds, being creative, being outside the box thinkers, because we don't, the funding is limited, the resources are limited. So we're working very closely and creatively to get the efforts streamlined, the funding in place to make this effort more productive. And again, the collaboration between the agencies is what I would say is different this time around. It's the governance structure that we've put in place with all the stakeholders is truly something that is a highlight in public sector, the way we are doing things. So these are some of the aspects. And I know Brian mentioned this morning that there was a FirstNet presentation, and we are working on the opt-in and opt-out options and making sure that we evaluate both the options very carefully. It's not an easy task because there's a lot at stake. And even with FirstNet, you'll be amazed to see the RFP options that we've put out. The team's been working tirelessly over the past several months to come up with an alternative plan if that's the path that we choose to go, and looking at the vendor AT&T's proposal as well. So there's a lot going on in terms of Office of Information Technology, and with Tony coming in, it's truly an exciting time. We take this very seriously, and again, if one thing as a takeaway from this panel is the collaboration between the agencies. Thank you.
Thanks, Suma. Economic development is something that is a little bit amorphous, right? I mean, everything, when you talk about whether or not you can have a vibrant economy, there are so many dependencies that exist. You have to have roads, so please keep building. You have to have schools, you have to have healthcare, you have to have things that support a community in order to continue an investment cycle that allows for this vibrancy. But most importantly, you need a platform that allows you to actually live and work in today's age, and broadband is that platform. It's not a nice to have, it's not a something that we're whining about, it's something that is crucial to the communities, and it's crucial to every single part of the community, whether or not you're living in a very rural area or you're living in a more dense area. You cannot truly live a modern life, build businesses, support yourself, unless you have access to usable broadband. So for me, this isn't a matter of, it's a really frustrating matter. I was talking to a friend of mine today who reminded me that I've only been on the job for 4 months and I'm already completely frustrated and feeling, I know, and feeling like this just isn't moving fast enough. It just isn't going fast enough. There are 3 things I would say is we've got to get solutions that work for us immediately. So time is of the essence. The second thing is we cannot look to purely public funding to solve this problem because it won't sustain the issue. And the third thing is we have to start really creatively digging into ways to solve this issue, both through things that we're learning here and from each other. I just came from a session from a gentleman that was recently with the FCC who I think he solved our entire problem. I'm in on that, but it's those types of learnings that can trigger movement that create a lot of momentum around this, and we cannot depend on the incumbent providers to do things that are illogical for themselves. We cannot pretend that they are They are in it for charity. They are certainly part of the communities there, but they're for-profit businesses, so we cannot be frustrated when they don't do things that don't make sense for themselves and or don't create an equal playing field. So I really do believe more than ever, given the communities that I've visited throughout Colorado so far, and the people that I know in this room, is that we have the resources to make a big difference. We're going to have to really take ownership and control of those outcomes, leverage every bit of resource we have, and ensure that we aren't, again, I think the way he said it was waiting for Harry Potter, waiting for Superman. We've got to really forge our own destiny with the help of everyone in this room. So my sentiment is time is of the essence. We cannot wait for core public support. We'll be waiting too long. And thirdly, we've got to learn and build from each other and make sure that we are being as transparent as we possibly can in order to create solutions that work for every community.
Again, my name is Mike Lewis. I'm the Deputy Executive Director at CDOT and the Chief Operating Officer. And I've got to say, I've never been on a panel with more comfortable chairs, and it's a good thing you turned the lights on because I saw Irv dropping off here a second ago.
Well, just try sitting over here. I mean, yeah.
Well, easy. Where's HR? So I'm going to... Okay, cool. But there are cameras out there, Stephanie. So I'm going to talk about three aspects that DOTs play in this realm. And I've only been in Colorado for 2 years, but I've been in this gig for 32, 7 of which was the director of the Rhode Island DOT, and prior to that, 23 years in Massachusetts. And I remember back in the day when this became a thing. It was in the early 2000s when Level 3, and Quest were all fighting it out for who could build it, networks across the world, really, and around the country. And it was the rush to get into the infrastructure. And that traditional role that departments of transportation played were owners of rights-of-way. It was the network existed. That was the obvious way to get broadband connected to most major destinations using DOT rights-of-way, and that remains the case. I mean, we are all across the country and all across Colorado, we have a network, an existing network of right-of-way to link up populated areas. So that will always be the case. I mean, we're the obvious player to go to look for access to make these connections, at least on the major trunks. So we want to continue to be that partner in that, and we will always provide that opportunity. The second aspect that DOTs are involved with is that we are users ourselves, and we are becoming much greater users of broadband and other communication links because transportation is becoming a much more information technology-focused service than it has historically. Historically, over the last 50 years, the last half of the last decade, we were about building infrastructure, it was about civil engineering, it was about steel and concrete, it was about paving roads and providing that service. But that's changing to a great degree, and it has over the last 10 or 15 years, and it is going to accelerate as we move forward, so that how we're going to get more efficiency out of our road systems is through technology and through vehicle-to-vehicle communication, vehicle-to-infrastructure communication, so that we can take the data that all of our little probes are gathering as they move around the state and the country, get that data and use it for the benefit of all those users. So we can turn that data into information, turn that information into products, turn that information into services, so that we can get better efficiency out of our systems. To do that, though, we are going to need better links, better communication across our highway network. It's pretty good in the urban areas, not so good in the rural areas. And one of the great advantages that we see in the industry of vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-infrastructure communication is a dramatic reduction in crashes, serious injuries, and fatalities. It's been estimated that 84% of crashes can be eliminated through vehicle-to-vehicle communications. Take the decision-making out of the driver's hands, put it in the vehicle's hands, and we can just drastically reduce the fatalities that are occurring across the country. But to do that, you have to have communication links. That information has to be able to go from vehicle to vehicle and then back into the information network so that so that information can be transferred back to the vehicle so action can be taken. So it's really critical that we expand our capabilities throughout our roadway network. So that's that second phase. It's our own needs to advance capacity improvements, safety improvements in both rural and urban parts of the state for passenger vehicles and freight as well. There's a great deal of advancement that we can make with the freight community through information exchange. Need the infrastructure to do that. The third area, and I think both Suma and Stephanie have talked about that, and I know Irv will, is that DOTs have traditionally been fairly siloed, I think. And it's our right of way, it's our needs. But I think what the governor sees, what Tony sees, what all of us see is this is a government, we're all one government of Colorado. And what do we do together to expand those services for all of our needs, whether it's economic development? I say in talks historically in the past, I've always said that departments of transportation exist for two reasons. The first, and Stephanie will be pleased at this, is that we exist to support the economic vitality of whatever jurisdiction we exist in, whether it's a city, a county, the state, or the country. That's our number one goal, is to support the economic vitality of that location. The second reason we exist is to support the quality of life of the people who live there. And I think that this connection, information connection across the state fits right into that. But we don't do it alone. We do it. We need to know what the local needs are. We need to know what the economic development opportunities are or the gaps are around the state. And then we need to be at the table so that we're working off of each other and supporting one another. And I think that's what this administration is bringing to the table. It is frustrating. There are rules that we have to play by. There are there are statutes that we have to play by. But I think the more that we work together to identify where the opportunities are, where some of your challenges are, it's not, it's sort of, and the value of Tony, it's one-stop shopping. Here's an opportunity, get us all together. What can we each bring to the table? How do we solve that problem collectively? So I think it's a real opportunity. I think we're on the cusp of that. We can't let this opportunity slip past us.
Well, last and certainly least, Department of Local Affairs. I just want to start out with one philosophical point, and it really was made this morning by the first speaker that talked about, well, second speaker. Stephanie was our first one. But our second speaker talking about their experiences in Chattanooga. And if you listen carefully, the first thing he said, hey, the reason we're on this road and the reason Chattanooga has changed is because we had leadership in the city council, the mayor, the local community, everybody got together and they made this a priority. For all the things that we do across the state, but especially in rural Colorado, that is always the model that works. I think it was Lincoln that said that with public sentiment, everything or anything is possible, and without it, nothing is possible. There is no way that we can help a community, and I'm going to talk about some of the details of how we've been doing that in broadband in a second, but there's no way any of us can help if that community hasn't decided they are ready to charge into this, to spend money, to make the commitment, the public commitment for the public officials, everybody from the ground up. If you're not ready to do that, millions of dollars or billions of dollars isn't going to fix these problems. And so I commend those places that have done this, and I'll start with Rio Blanco County. A little bit about our grants. The $20 million that was set aside about 3.5 years ago now was done at a time when DOLA was a little cash flush with the severance taxes that we get. And it was not a decision that DOLA made on its own. It was basically demand of communities saying, look, we're working with our local private partners, et cetera, but this ain't going fast enough for us. We need your help. And so my predecessor decided to jump on that bandwagon, and we've now spent about 17.4 of that 20 million on a variety of things, both planning and projects. Rio Blanco was one of the first out the gate, and they decided early on that they wanted to make this a priority, and they have. And I'm here to tell you, they now have both Meeker and Rangeley are 1 gig towns. There aren't many in the United States. They were, I think, the first two. Probably in the state, but 1 gig towns. They already have between them close to 400 hookups already just in the private side, and what's more important, they think they're probably going to be somewhere around 700 by the end of the year. Take rate has been, they projected 45%, it's been 60 to 70% so far. So this, by any measure, is going at great guns, and if you want to talk to Blake and those folks, he's here, I know, they have done a marvelous job. But the money that we put in isn't for that private side, it is for the community anchor institutions and the middle mile infrastructure, and off of that then is built a lot of all the other things that come through public-private partnerships that these communities are involved in. Region 10, incredible work, just had a great meeting with them today. Their project is much bigger, over some more challenging terrain, 6 different counties involved, but Montrose and Delta are both nearing the 1 gig position now, at least for their community anchor institution, and out of that will come more opportunities as well. Paonia, I think, is already a 1 gig town, if I remember correctly. So there's a lot going on in that, and I love the Region 10 work because that is an area that has been particularly challenged by the changing economics of coal and other things. And these are communities that are basically making a decision to do something about that. You can sit around and wait for maybe the old thing to come back, or you can start figuring out what the new things are. And so a lot of the work that they've done there. And the other part about the Region 10 side, DMEA has been a big part of this, so regional co-op, been a big part of their success and continues to work with them, and so we commend them for that. So one of the things to remember is we knew that $20 million wasn't going to fix this problem. It wasn't even going to hardly be a down payment on it. But what it was going to be is an opportunity to try things out, to see what's going to work, to learn under small models, so that as we continue to build these models out, we can find out what works and then use that as more funds become available. And of course, as we've talked about in many of the settings in the last few days, the first thing you say is, where's the money? Because if you don't have the money, there's a lot of this that can't be done. The private sector can't fix it all for the reasons that Stephanie talked about, and public money is, is a scarce commodity in many cases. A couple other things before we go to some of the questions. One of the things that's important about this, it has to be timely. As Stephanie mentioned, it also has to be affordable. We have had places that have had high capacity service, but at 10 times the rate that people in Denver pay. That's not a sustainable model, especially not in rural and small communities, because frequently the income level there won't sustain that. By the way, I forgot to tell you, and you're going to drool at this because I drool every time I hear of it, and I live in Colorado Springs. 1 gig service in Meeker and Rangeley is $70 a household. If you only want 100 meg service, that's $50 a household. Yeah, I know. I don't even want to know what I'm paying CenturyLink for 25 megs, but and that's not a shot at CenturyLink, by the way. Western State University, they were have been paying $14,000 per month for 1 gig service. Pretty soon here, with the work that the Region 10 folks are doing, they'll be down somewhere in the area of $1,600 a month. You think about higher education institutions and the very significant financial issues they're facing, that is a huge amount of money to save to do other more important things in their place. So that's working well. The regional plans, we're almost done. We have awarded 24 regional opportunities for plans. We have right now, I believe, 14 are completed. And those are posted on our website if you want to look at them. The details are there, right there. You can see what's up. Doesn't mean some of them aren't going to change as we learn new information, but that's a starting point. And then what those plans will do is allow, as new funds come around, if the feds come in with more money or something like that, then we'll have the opportunity to basically be very close to shovel ready and get out there and get moving on some of these projects. So we have right now about $2.8 million left in the fund. We'll continue to finish off the plans. They're pretty much going to be all done within this year. And then we're also continuing to take applications for various projects. Even when that money is depleted, communities can still come in through our normal energy impact fund process just means they have to make this a priority over maybe water and sewer or something else, depending on what is going in their community. But they can come in and ask for grants on that, and they'll still be available. So I'll stop there, but that's the work we've been doing thus far. And I got to tell you, we couldn't be more pleased. But we know, as Mike was talking about everything else, you know, we've been working with our partners in many of these cases, both in the communities, but also inside the cabinet. And we know that any future things that are going to have to happen are just going to model off of some of the work we've done so far.
Well, thank you, everybody. That's a great kickoff. And, you know, one of the things I was listening to, so it's being frustrated after 60 days, is that bad? No, but just kidding. You know, one of the things that I did want to mention, though, is that I also, when I came on board, I feel like I inherited a very great team of folks to work with, and I know most of you know them, and I just have to say them by first name. So it's Brian, it's Megan, it's Kim, it's Ed. The folks that have been working on both FirstNet and the broadband issues are just a phenomenal team of folks within the state that we work with every day. So let me open it up to questions, because I know you guys have questions. So who wants to be first?
And the bill would have defined broadband speeds at the FCC speed or greater, and among other things, fixing the high-cost fund and the DOLA grant fund. And there may be some effort over the summer and the interim committees leading up to the next legislative session to do the same things, which I think would be most rural developers of broadband would like to see. Do you see a chance of that happening? I know the legislative session the last day was kind of swarmed by about 25 lobbyists at least who were opposed to this amendment. And what do you see happening next year?
Okay, I'll give it a shot, and then I'll turn it over to some folks that have probably been at this a little bit longer than I have. I watched that whole process over the last, week and a half of the legislative and the last day. And without getting into all the specifics, I think one of the things I'd like to see us try to do is over the course of the summer, as we get ready for the next session, to really work with the legislators, the various stakeholders involved, to see if we can really do a better job of educating people what we're trying to accomplish here. And I agree with you, there's a lot of lobbying that goes on. But I think that we are on the right path. This is something we have to solve. I have yet to meet a person who disagrees with wanting to provide broadband access universally. Now, we get into debates about how much speed someone should have and all those kinds of things. And I start talking about outcomes. And what types of outcomes do you want to deliver in your community? And I think that will drive the kind of broadband capabilities that you need for that community. So I would like to see us have a much more coordinated effort. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm here in this role. And I look to work with all of my partners here and with the governor's office to figure out how to do that. So do you guys like to add?
Just on the speed questions, Brian, would you like to answer on just the specifics of the speeds that the FCC has put forward with?
Well, no, that's, okay.
FCC standards, yeah.
Correct, right. Yeah, so, the 25.3 is what we'd like to see as a minimum. Frankly, I think we ought to be much more aggressive about where we want to go. But let's at least get that one over the finish line. And for the things that we're doing in terms of the investments we make through the funding that we get out of the high cost fund, we go after 25.3 or better. So,
just back to the legislation that was really put through in the very last few days of the session. There's three things that became very apparent. One is we need to do a really good job of educating the legislative stakeholders to really understand what they're asking for and what they're writing. We cannot, I'm going to use an overused term, we cannot continue to contribute to this knot we're building around regulation that creates, a win here and a loss here, or a win here, but in a circumstance that's never going to happen. So there's a lot, I think we need to greatly simplify what we're talking about, really focus on legislation that provides more pathways of competition and undo things that are inhibiting communities helping themselves. And that is, that's as simple as that. We need to do more education around that, and then we need to also make sure that what is being proposed is well understood by the communities, so that we're also not expecting either resistance or support on something that is ambiguous in its play. And again, as a newcomer to the legislative process, I think I've said this joke a few times, I got my entire education around the legislative process from Schoolhouse Rock, and it was a little lacking. I can sing every word of it. It was a little lacking, but the interesting thing to me was that there's so many opportunities to create confusion that it's surprising to me that actually anything moves through. And so we have to do a very good job of creating complete transparency so people understand what they're supporting and what they're not, and we understand all of the unintended consequences of anything that we're putting forward. And that means that our stakeholders include not just our communities, singly and foremostly our communities, but also those providers that have built the assets that are in the state today, and those that we want to invite in to build more assets. So we've got to anticipate that as much as we possibly can. That is a sometimes painful process, but it's absolutely necessary, and that's the hard work that we have to do over the next several months to get ready for session, to put any legislation forth that's going to help us. One last thing I'd say is, Brian and I have been talking about this quite a bit, and it's becoming more and more kind of forefront in my mind based on what we've heard around rural electric cooperatives, as well as just fiber that exists in the state. To the extent that we can gain and provide easier access to existing infrastructure that is in the state and is not being used, that unleashes values and investment that have been made years prior before, been made many prior years before, and will help us to then not have to reinvest in areas that have already been built. So things like easement perfection, make ready, et cetera, pull attach, things like that are issues I think we need to address in the forefront that can unlock value that both communities and providers can access.
Just to add to that, as a technologist in the room, we need to think outside the box, to my earlier comments about thinking about technologies that are not just the standard 25/3 and all the speeds that we were talking about, but challenge ourselves to look at technologies that haven't been invented yet, and how do we bring that, the speed to market with the newer technologies. So again, as a community, we need to all come together to bring technologies and bring, like Google with Project Loon, totally outside the box thinking. Things like that to the table, so we are thinking about different ways of getting that connectivity, not just the traditional assets and inventory and the things that we've been doing so far.
Go ahead.
Drew Davis from Laramie County, Colorado. Thank you for being here today and your succinct comments about what your thoughts are. Earlier, the panel made a comment about we shouldn't expect incumbent service providers, for-profit companies to make investments where it doesn't make financial sense for them to do that, and that is a true business statement. My concern is that we see incumbent service providers using their place in the regulatory environment to block local innovation and to bring higher speed internet, higher speed connectivity because they have rights of first refusal. Does the panel have any suggestions about how we might move beyond this to be able to allow local innovation without being blocked by incumbent service providers?
I'm going to take a shot at this, which is a very naive response, and I'll let everybody else correct me on this. I think as long as, and this happens everywhere, we see it on the news, we see it in everyday life, as long as if there's a win-lose approach to a problem, chances are everybody, you're not going to get anywhere. I think what we're trying to do is advocate for win-win. There's not a windfall to anybody. There's a benefit to everybody. There's a recognition that businesses have a business model that they need to meet, otherwise they're not going to be in business for very long. But that there's if there's a cooperative approach to solving those problems, we're much better, more likely to achieve success. Mm-hmm. If any of the parties, whether it's the government party or private party, local party, if there's too much of self-interest, then I think the results will be, you're not going to get anywhere. And I think that's sort of my intro.
Let me just comment on I think I made the comment around this, and my intention was that instead of being just frustrated and waiting for them to donate or waiting for them to do something that's unnatural, we have to look for ways, exactly to his point, which are cooperative in nature, and if not, then take on, essentially move around and create our own solutions. So I completely and could not agree with you more that the playing field needs to be fair, meaning that we either need to find win-win areas through cooperation, or we need to have the path to help ourselves on a fair playing field. I absolutely agree with that, and there are many, many nuances to our legislation that we should be overly simplifying and cleaning up exactly along those lines.
Yeah, because I want to specifically on the issue of first right of refusal. That is something that's statutory in the current broadband board in terms of the way things work. That could be fixed in legislation. The other comment I would make is that, and I've actually said this to CenturyLink, look, I'm willing to work with anybody that's willing to work with me. I get the reasons, if they could make the business model to provide broadband services throughout the state, they would have done it already. So that's the reason why they're not doing it. And if they're not willing to come up with creative business models to allow us to deploy those services, then, maybe you ought to get out of the way. Now, recognizing they have a long legacy of lobbying in most states, the telecom industry, I come from that industry, so I know what I'm talking about. So I know they have a very strong interest in the things that they're trying to get done. But that doesn't mean that we don't have power within this room to drive a different set of outcomes.
And I just want to add, since we work with rural communities across the board and small communities, because that's our major job, I think the thing we always continue to point out is somebody in a rural community, a kid that's going to high school in a rural community, should have the same access as somebody who lives in Denver. And if we don't continue to push that point, then we're being unfair. The doctor that's doing telemedicine in a small rural hospital should be able to provide the same service that somebody that's working in Denver. If anybody thinks that's different, please come out and see me afterwards, and we'll have a pointed discussion about that. It's wrong. Now, is it easy? No, we got that. And so that's why we're going to need to bring resources to the table when we've got that. I agree with the point we want to work with everybody. Where I get testy is when folks start suggesting that because you don't live in the major metro area, you get less service. That may be the way it is right now because it's been the hardest thing nut to crack, but it is not acceptable, and we will not accept it. And when the governor has put forward the goals that he's had, 85% of all rural Colorado connected not later than the end of his term, and by the end of 2020, so 2 years after his term, he's passing this to the next people, that we're 100%. He's not fooling about that. Is it going to be hard? Yes, and as we get closer to the bottom part of that, it's going to be really hard. But that's the goal. That's the one we've put our shoulders against. And we believe that for our industry partners, there is much more opportunity here than threat, and we urge them and know that in many cases they're willing to work with us. So.
Can you pass the mic over? Okay. Thank you. It should be on.
It was off, thanks. I'm Lori Sherwood with Vantage Point Solutions, and I have a question regarding the $2.8 million in remaining DOLA funds. We were told that those funds were frozen, and you had said that you were still accepting applications, and so I just wanted to see if you could clarify exactly what the status is of those funds and how they're going to be distributed.
Yeah, and it's actually, I misspoke, it's 2.6 million, but yes, they are not frozen now. So at the about a month before the end of the session, what we called it frozen, but it was restricted funds, and this is for a whole bunch of variety of stuff that we don't have to get into here. The JBC had the right to unrestrict them, and they did. And so that was a whole bunch of money, both for us and DNR, but embedded in that was the $2.6 million. So we, during the little desert that we had there, we continued to take applications because we still had some money available. Greg Winkler is the guy that helps manage this for us. He's a regional manager, but he's also our head guy on the broadband issues. But now we've opened back up. Now 2.6 million can get burned pretty quickly, but we're ready to put that out there. And again, even when that's finished, people can still apply, but it would be through the normal Energy Impact Fund, and if the project competes well, then it'll be funded. So.
In addition, we have 9.45 million that was transferred out of the high-cost support mechanism to the broadband fund. That's for last mile implementation, so we'll be starting up that process as well. So.
With Custer County Economic
Dale?
Development. Had the honor of meeting you here a month or so ago when you first came on board. You were introduced by the Lieutenant Governor, who said that Governor Hickenlooper had brought you in here to make a difference. I guess I'd be interested and put you on the spot. What 2 or 3 things are you going to accomplish in the next 18 months that are going to make a difference?
Yeah, Tony. What are you going to do?
All righty then. All right, the good questions are coming now. So, for me, there are 2 things. One is, obviously, we have a very aggressive goal that we want to achieve for the 85% rural households with access. I'm going to do everything within my power, within the resources that we have within the state to drive towards that. So that's like mission, goal number 1, mission 1. The second thing for me that I would like to really see us have is a much broader view of where do we want this state to be in 5 years, in 10 years, and be able to talk about that within all of the regions. I think we've done a phenomenal job with the funding that DOLA has provided to create regional plans, and now you're seeing some of the middle mile implementations coming. We just had a first round of the last mile investments that have gone on. I want to make sure that we're not just solving the near-term, short-term issues, that we're also looking at how do we want to connect these regions together? What do we want the whole state infrastructure to look like over time? Now, that may be something that happens well after, my tenure in this role, but if we ought to have a very clear, consistent strategy for that going across the entire state. And I think the way to go at it, personally, is to look at it from the work that we've already done at the regional level, because I think the plans, in most cases, are very good. And we're starting to see some of the build-outs from that, and I think we just need to build on top of it. So.
And no pressure, Tony, but the governor is tracking all of your goals on a public dashboard on the website.
Yes, I do know this. Here's the one cool thing about coming to work here at the state. The governor is a business person by training. I've spent 30-plus years in the business sector, so I know exactly how to respond to it. He really talks about this in terms of outcomes. What result are you going to deliver? And let's not, talk about PowerPoints and all this other stuff. What are you going to do? And so I think that's the cool thing about being in this environment right now here in Colorado, because, again, I think the passion's in the state. And I think it goes back to the comment I made earlier about the fact that citizens have to vote that they want this. And so they're telling us that there's something they really want to do.
So Wendell Pryor from Chaffee County. This is directed at Stephanie, but how are you going to align the economic development goals with those from OIT? I know you've got some initiatives that have come out of the Office of Economic Development, but how do you see that aligning with the goal that OIT has?
Yeah, it's not even an alignment, it's a core dependency. We rank too far low in statistics for us to not be worried about it economically if we don't fix this issue. We rank in the 30 or below in rural coverage relative to the rest of the U.S., which I've said before. Even the metro areas are very low in their stat rankings on what type of coverage and access businesses have. So a couple things I think about when I visited Chaffee County. You took me to one of the businesses that I supported economic development by shopping in, and and we were going through how they transact. And when she was taking my credit card, she's holding it up to the window to try to get a wireless signal to take my money. That's not a place where she's going to want to stay long term if she wants to grow her business, because it's not viable for her balance sheet. That is an absolute. That's not an anecdote. That is the reality for many of these businesses. I was in Grand Junction a few weeks ago giving an interview, and someone asked me, well, is broadband an attractor to companies that are looking to come to Colorado? And the fact is, it's not an attractor, it's an assumption. They assume it's here. It's not something that people even think about not being available. And when they realize it, it creates friction that they didn't expect and frankly inhibits growth. So tying back to how we then support that, a couple of the things we've been thinking about. So first of all, our enterprise zone capital investment tax credits are all available for these types of contribution projects, and we should be making sure we're taking advantage of those, specifically in areas that are designated enterprise zone, which the majority of rural Colorado is. That's something that I think sometimes is overlooked and we need to be looking at. The second thing, when we are looking at funding for building out of a local network, we should be understanding how it's going to offset costs in other areas. For example, I don't know how many communities I've been in that have said, we do not have the resources to have multiple specialties of healthcare in our market. We have to access from markets that are 50 miles away. Well, there's something called video conferencing and telemedicine that actually works, but it only works if you have funding there. Those types of contribution projects also are part of the enterprise zone tax credits and can create a funding mechanism for broadband infrastructure. Those are really, really important and creative ways to connect the dots. Again, not relying on public funding, but ensure that we're incorporating every avenue that we have. The third thing I would say is the school districts. We have a lot of school districts across the state, and many communities surround their culture around those schools, which is absolutely important. But I think there's an opportunity for us to also share online learning between the districts to create a better environment. Again, if we look at how much we're spending in schools, and we could share that cost across multiple school districts if we had core connectivity, that's another way to divert funds into building that infrastructure that then creates technological support for even more sophistication in our schooling and getting out of 4-day-a-week school weeks and getting into education that's actually going to equip our kids. So there's a little bit of no one single answer, but it's those types of thoughts that I look through every day when I think about how do I make sure that the economic incentives and the tax incentives we're putting in place for businesses can also be used for those people that want to invest in broadband as a business that happens to have a byproduct, much more natural support for the state. Last thing I would say is we are working on creating a network. Phil Weiser was here earlier. He and I and one other guy, the guy that runs Foundry Networks, are looking at creating a rural fund specifically for rural economic development and businesses. We're going to target that network and that fund access to ensuring that it's creating a groundswell of support for broadband investment and potentially even helping to fund some broadband companies that want to start up in rural communities that need that type of working capital to get that going. So any other ways that anyone has ideas that we could work better, I am all ears, because there's no silver bullet, and I don't think we have even 20% of the answers. So a really great question, and I appreciate it. Hopefully that helped.
One other aspect of this, so it's not just about certainly what Stephanie's doing with OIT, what we do with OIT, what we do with Stephanie. We've just had some meetings recently. We've always had a very tightly coupled relationship with OEDIT because of a long history for 20, 30 years. In fact, they were born of us a long, long time ago, but they've grown up, and so they're their own thing, and they're a great thing. But one of the things that I was talking again to the folks in Rio Blanco County, I said, okay, so you're hearing about new business possibilities, and they are. I won't talk about them specifically because they're still too nascent, but folks are starting to call. It's news that they have the 1 gig service in 2 towns. I think, again, back to the historical analogy, I think it was Benjamin Franklin who was asked at the end of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, well, what good is this? And he said, well, what's good is a newborn baby. We have to watch now, because it takes a while. And economic development, as you all painfully know, is that you do something today and something great happens tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. But we've done some great things, and I mean we collectively. And the places where we were really starting to take off with this technology, now we need to start measuring, okay, job growth, new business licenses, new businesses, et cetera, and see what's happening. Similarly, we need to continue to watch the places that are lagging, because we already know that there are pockets where companies have actually pulled out, because if you don't have a high-speed connection, you actually can't be a business anymore. I mean, it's just pretty much the way the world is now. So I think that's the other part, as metrics starting to measure that, because then we can say, look, this kind of investment caused this action to happen, cause jobs, cause economic prosperity.
I forgot one more thing. We are getting ready to apply for a grant. It's around $1 million that will be used to be given to communities that have created very vibrant and deep networks to help them market themselves as a gigabit city or a modern, a digitized city, or something that will help underpin the fact that there's not a trade-off for living in a rural community for access to technology. So as we will be using that for those communities and be giving that to them to help promote those communities as far as new business starts are concerned and business recruitment and relocation. So one other thing in support of really, making sure the networks are put to work.
Okay. We have time for probably like one more question.
Chris Kennedy, Region 10. First of all, thank you all for being here at the conference. I think for everybody in the room, the ability to network and talk to you all one-on-one and talk about some of the concerns we have is certainly very well appreciated. And for me personally, I appreciate all of your efforts in being available and making yourselves accessible, not just at Mount Connect, but Tony and Stephanie, as you've just come new to your positions, you make the rounds, and you're being involved in the community. So I want to really tip my hat to you for that. Comment and then kind of a little bit of a question that is a little bit outside broadband. We hear a lot in the news about the economic success of Colorado as a whole, unemployment rates getting to this 2% number, and it's great that we celebrate those successes. But I think for many of the communities represented in this room, that the economic divide is real and it's palpable, and it's certainly things that we've been talking about, where, whether it's Mesa County or Garfield or others, where those unemployment rates are still north of 4%, sometimes 5%, and they're not reaping the benefits of that. Everybody in this room, I know, it feels that broadband is one of the key components to starting to bridge that divide. But I'm also interested in what are the other components that DOLA, OEDIT, and the departments, the cabinet that you represent, are using to tie all of those incentives together in order to create economic development opportunities that may not necessarily be relying on broadband, but where broadband is still a key component of it.
Which one of you guys want to go
I'll
first?
start, but one of the things, of course, so my theory of the case is, we are growing by close to 100,000 people a year. Stephanie and others have talked about that. We, as a state, now that about 30% of that is just more babies than people who die, but the rest of it is folks that are moving here. And the folks that move here, 85% of them move to the Front Range. My goal, if it's 20 years from now and I'm still alive, is to look back and say, okay, we got that to maybe 75% move to the Front Range, or maybe 70%. The water's on this, on that side, this side of the hump. Can we kind of get some other things to move that way? I say that because, so for all our investments, and whether it's on the Eastern Plains or other places, the thing we're really looking at, we've spent $1 billion in the last 8 years, one with a B, $1 billion of severance and FML money across the state, with 30% of that as direct distribution, the rest of it through grants. And the whole idea behind that is to keep communities stable, in their basic infrastructure, water, sewer, roads, and I now believe broadband to the extent that we can, and then to put them on a path where they are places that people want to work, live, and play. And so, again, that, though, always takes investment by the communities. So, again, it's back to you. You have to make those investments. I know it's hard. Your tax base is eroded. These are not small items to you, but that's the first place you start. Then the other thing that we're trying to do now is, there's a big planning process. If you've ever got a DOLA grant, the first thing we do is we make you plan. And it's ugly, and it doesn't cost a lot of money, and it's not a lot of fun. But we know that making a grant isn't an event, it's a process, and we're trying to get you into a position where we know operationally and everything else, you're ready for this when it happens. We're not trying to be paternal, but we also realize that frequently for smaller communities, your capacity to deal with these things isn't like a place like Fort Collins or Colorado Springs or Denver. And so we're trying to assist you with that. But as you make those investments, what we're trying to do now is match, and again, Stephanie and I have been talking about this, how do we match their process as they start doing Blueprint and some other things that she'll talk about? How are we matching our process to say, okay, have you, not to make it an extra thing that you have to jump over, but have you started talking to OEDIT about what you might be doing on your economic development side? And frequently you have, but to try to formalize those things so that we're investing in places that are investing in themselves, number one, and also that places that have a plan and a future to try to get to something better as time goes on.
So a couple other things I would add. What's been interesting around correlations that I just didn't know existed until I've started observing, there are three areas that I've seen a lot of creating a lot of growth for communities or a lot of change. And one of the main thing rural communities have at risk is their population is aging out. And that's not a knock on an aging population because I'm part of that. But it is the fact is we have to, keeping families and kids in those communities to then to work and live and play in those communities is a core part of any growth of a community. If you have more people moving out than you have being born, you're going to have a declining community and a declining tax base. So how do you make these places people want to be? Our creative industries that are part of OEDIT have shown this phenomenal correlation between investing in creative industries and all of a sudden it's sparking all other kinds of economic transactions, both real estate transactions, hospitality transactions, and tourism transactions. So that's one tool that I would encourage all of you to leverage in your communities. How do you really exploit that in the community, whether it means more music venues, more create for space programs that allow for commercial artists to come into play, which has this natural magnetic effect to others. It is not a correlation that was obvious to me. When I look at the numbers, it's really, really compelling. The second thing I say is really understand what your core industry or your core diversity of industry could be and understand how to both exploit workforce development in those areas as well as applying for grants that can supply kind of multiplying functions across that. I talk about the Montrose case quite a bit with Mayfly really bringing in and revitalizing an entire section of the riverfront in Montrose. Partnering with them, we're looking at putting in an entire AI makerspace and a center for development that will both support their workforce needs as well as create an opportunity for others in the community to start businesses and stay in the community, which is something that we think is vitally important. And then the third thing I would say is tourism is obviously a big part of the state. On the Eastern Plains, agritourism has become something bigger and bigger, and the Western Plains outdoor rec has really created both industry and touristic opportunities. Really take advantage of the resources that we can provide, as well as understanding and exploiting your own, to know that that type of investment will create an attraction and a magnet for both people to want to visit, but more importantly, will want people want to live where others just get to visit. So those are kind of three areas that may seem not directly kind of incentive-based, tax-based, but certainly are ways to create places where you're going to have a population that wants to stay.
Just to add to that, from a technology perspective, we want to use technology as an equalizer, right? To Irv's point, the agencies that offer digital services, it should be the same in the Front Range as well as what we get in like Grand Junction or anywhere else. It should be that equalizer. And we are embarking on a very aggressive digital transformation strategy as the Office of Information Technology to ensure, again, these government services are available and it's easy interacting with government as easy as interacting with Amazon.com, providing that same type of experience. So all these things are the backbone of what we are trying to do in terms of making sure that the digital divide is equalized.
Okay.
I'm just going to have one quick word, and because I look at everything through a transportation lens, but I think about the last half of the last century, what drove the economic development of this country post-World War II was the creation and the building of the interstate highway system. It connected every community in the country of 50,000 or more. That was a network of transportation. And it was surface transportation that drove that economic growth. This is that network that's going to drive the growth in the 21st century. And I think we need to, as Stephanie said, we need to do a better job educating the public, educating the legislature, that we need to be thinking in those terms. And that's because if you're not connected, you're going to be left behind, just like the small town in the middle of Nebraska that is, 50 miles from Interstate 70. You dry up because you don't have that access to compete. And I think I think we need to be thinking about it in those terms.
So again, I want to thank you all for participating today, and I know I can speak for the entire panel. We look forward to continuing to work with you, and we'll interact with you informally through the rest of the Connect event. So thank you.